Hey guys, Coffee Cranks here. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to showcase you a Winter Orb build. I know what you're gonna say. Winter Orb? Nah, that skill is dead. Why are you trying to beat a dead horse? Hey, why don't you play a Bama Necro instead? Ugh. But here's the thing. I love Winter Orb. It's only one of the most satisfying skills if you're like me and like mapping instead of, that other thing, like bossing. So anyway, me being a typical contrarian, I wanted to build something that other people were claiming was long dead. It's time we saw the results. First, let's take a look at the key stats in Path of Building. You have around 3 million DPS, and that is not including the flasks. You have 100% crit chance, partially because you have 9 power charges. Also, you have 9 frenzy charges, both because of the body armor implicit, 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on hit, and because of the badge of the Brotherhood, which makes your maximum frenzy charges equal to your maximum power charges. If you look at the configuration tab, you will see that the enemies are always chilled, always exposed to cold, which means that they have minus 10% to cold resistance, and always unnerved, which means that they take 10% increased spell damage. For defensive layers, let's look first at the Pantheon. We use Soul of the Brine King for the major god, and Soul of Aberrath for the minor god. Brine King makes it so you cannot be stunned twice in a row, and Aberrath makes you immune to Burning Ground. You also have 75% Chaos Resistance, 100% Spell Suppression chance, and 100% chance to avoid elemental ailments, which is coming both from your boots that have 50% chance, and from the unique jewel Ancestral Vision, which gives you 50% of spell suppression chance as a chance to avoid elemental ailments. You also have 60% evasion chance, which is pretty decent for mapping, but I wouldn't say that the build is insanely tanky. It gets by and it can avoid a lot of nasty hits, but once in a while you can get hit and you will die. So if you were wondering if this build is hardcore viable, it is not. When it comes to the EHP pool, you have about 4k life and about 1k energy shield. And if you look at the tree, you also have a keystone passive Ghost Dance, which basically makes you recover energy shield proportionate to how much evasion rating you have. You're always gonna leech life, and you're gonna leech energy shield, and you even have a little bit of a life regen in case your stone golem is up. Let's look at the Ascendancy tree. The first and most important node is Profane Bloom. Profane Bloom is really good for mapping. Why? Because basically when monsters die, they explode and deal part of their life as chaos damage, and as we know, chaos damage is very hard to mitigate. So monsters are less likely to have chaos resistance than they are to have fire, cold, or lightning resistance. The second most important node is Forbidden Power. The reason is because you have a lot of power charges, and this node gives you increased area of effect per power charge and increased damage per power charge. It also gives you more power charges, and you can gain a power charge after spending a total of 200 mana. So I would say if you're leveling, I would go for this node, as well as Profane Bloom, as early as possible. And with Profane Bloom, make sure that you have a way to proc the curse, so you can run Blasphemy, for example. The last two nodes are Void Beacon and Frigid Wake. Basically, they just make you deal more damage and make monsters less resistant to your damage. The tree is made for a level 100. However, if you would like to know which nodes to pick up last, that would probably be some jewel sockets, then maybe these nodes, and then maybe these nodes. When it comes to skill gems, the main setup consists of Winter Orb, Greater Multiple Projectiles, Ice Bite, increased critical damage, Power Charge on critical, and increased critical strikes. You can also buy Winter Orb level 21, 20 quality. It's pretty cheap. It's maybe around 10C or so. For movement skill, you can use either Frost Blink or Flame Dash. I personally prefer Flame Dash. And you can link it with Arcane Surge and increased duration. Arcane Surge will give you a little bit more cast speed and mana regen. You can also optionally use Frost Bomb linked with increased area of effect and increased duration. Frostbomb applies cold exposure and also prevents enemies from regenerating health super fast, which can be super useful in League mechanics like Expedition. If you want, you can also use Vortex for fighting bosses and tanky rares, which provides chill and a little bit of a cold dot. To avoid bigger hits, make sure to not forget to set up your cast 1 damage taken, linked with Steel Skin, Summon Stone Golem, and increased duration. Summon Stone Golem will provide you with a little bit of that life regen I was talking about. Pay attention to the levels of cast 1 damage taken and Steel Skin. If you feel like they're too high, you can level them down a little bit and see what works better for you. That really depends on the content that you're running. For the auras, you want to be running Hatred, Grace, and Herald of Ice linked to Enlighten level 3. You don't actually need Enlighten level 4, however, if you do have one, make sure to replace the implicit on your helmet, which gives you 7% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills. You can use something else there that gives you a little bit more damage. Next, let's take a look at the gear section. So we have 2 void batteries, which are really nice because essentially what they do is they reduce spell damage, but then they increase spell damage per power charge. So if you have a lot of power charges, like in our case we have 9 power charges, you're actually getting a lot out of it, and you're getting extra power charges on top of it. Plus, you're getting increased global critical strike chance and increased cast speed. So this weapon is pretty much perfect for Winter Orb. Next up, we have the helmet. The helmet needs to be a dexterity intelligence hybrid base because you just want a bunch of evasion rating and energy shield both, and also you want chance to suppress spell damage as a fracture mod. You either want a fracture mod or you want to buy a base that's already crafted for you so it has all the perfect stats, but because that might be a little bit more expensive, it's easier sometimes to buy a fracture base. And once you have the fracture base, you want to slam it with an essence of greed. Either a deafening or a shrieking one. I would use deafening, they're not that expensive and it's just worth it to get a little bit of that extra life. So you want to slam it with an essence and you want to have 1 high tier of resistance. Fire, cold, lightning, doesn't matter. Even chaos can be pretty good if you are actually missing a lot of chaos res. So you want to get that, and you want an open suffix so you can craft additional resistances like you see in this case. For Eldritch Implicit, you want 7% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills and 4% increased damage per power charge, which are coming from lesser embers. I never bother with greater or grand embers, so these are the lowest tier embers. For body armor, again, you want a hybrid base, ideally a Sadist Garb, but it can also be a lower tier body armor, and you want 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on hit as an implicit. That's a synthesis mod, so you need to purchase a body armor that already has that mod. Ideally, it needs to be 6-linked, but also sometimes it's cheaper to buy a non-linked one and then link it yourself, for example with fusings. Do not under any circumstances apply Syrian Exarch or Eater of World influence on this base, because once you do, that implicit mod is going to be lost forever and you're never getting it back. Once you have the base 6-linked, you go to the Harvest crafting bench and you reroll rare item with a chance to get defense modifiers. So your goal is to get 3 defense modifiers. So in this case, for example, I have plus 302 to evasion rating, 68% increased evasion and energy shield, and plus 74 to maximum energy shield. So you just want 3 of those. You also want a high tier resistance, like for example, fire, cold, lightning resistance, or even chaos resistance, and you want an open suffix to craft additional resistances. Make sure to never have life modifiers on this body armor, for example, life or life regen, because if you do, then you cannot use that node on the tree that gives you 15% increased maximum life if you have no life modifiers on body armor. And it's really hard to beat that node, even if you have an extremely high tier life roll on body armor. For gloves, the process is very similar to how you got the helmet, so either you buy a base with a fracture chance to suppress spell damage, or if you cannot find one, you just buy the gloves that have everything, and sometimes one or the other can be more expensive. It depends on the market and it depends on the state of the league, so it's hard to tell which one is going to be cheaper at this point. Once you have the gloves, you can get Syrian Exarch and Eater of Worlds influence on them, and you should get 0.2% of cold damage leached as life. That gives you some leech, that's really nice. And 15% chance to unnerve enemies for 4 seconds on hit. That's really important because that's the only source for unnerve for us. The crafting process for boots is a little bit different. So, because it's a Necropolis League, I didn't go through a very tedious and expensive process of crafting them. Instead, I purchased the base that had plus lightning resistance and increased movement speed both. And then I just used Essence of Loathing until I got a high tier life roll and an open suffix so I could craft extra resistances. And it was fairly cheap, it wasn't super expensive. So once you get that, you can use Syrian Exarch and Eater of Worlds influence until you get chance to avoid elemental ailments and increased action speed. So you want total chance to avoid elemental ailments on boots to be 50% or more. So in this case, I have 51%, which is good enough. And then you can add another 50% from your Ancestral Vision Jewel. The rings ideally should be amethyst rings, but don't have to be. As you can see in my case, I have an amethyst ring and the other ring is a ruby ring. So what you want on those rings is curse enemies with frostbite on hit and curse enemies with elemental weakness on hit. Either curse can be on either ring, it doesn't matter, but since we can use 2 curses at a time, we want both of those curses. For extra stats, look out for strength, dexterity, life, and maybe some crit multi if you have currency for that. And don't forget that your rings ideally should have an open prefix so you can craft channeling skills have -3 to total mana cost on both of them. This is a craft that you can get from unveiling Elrion rings from Betrayal. Now the curse mods can also come as implicits on rings, and that one costs a little bit more money, so if you have the budget for it, just go for it, and then you can craft rings maybe with essences and roll a lot better modifiers, so that all depends on how much money you have. For the belt, you just want a Stygian Vice, and I didn't craft it, I just bought the one that I found online, and it has a life roll, it has chaos resistance, it has another high tier resistance. You can slam it with a catalyst so that you can get even more resistances, and you ideally want an open suffix on it so you can again craft additional resistances. So this is a slot for a lot of resistances, and that's really nice, and that's why it's so hard to slot in Headhunter in this build, because once you equip the Headhunter, you lose a lot of resistances in the slot. For the Abyss Jewel that you could socket into the belt, you should get something like this one. So for example, it has life, it has chance to gain phasing on kill, which is really nice, and it has global crit multi, which is again super helpful, gives you a bunch of damage. Increased Impale effect doesn't do anything, it's just an extra mod. Make sure to buy Watcher's Eye that has plus to critical strike chance while affected by hatred. It caps our critical strike chance, so it's really important to have that mod. You don't need a second one. If you get Watcher's Eye with 2 mods, that's super good. However, they're extremely expensive and most people just get one and it's fine. I already mentioned Ancestral Vision, so what it does is, because we have 100% to suppress spell damage, 50% of that counts as our chance to avoid elemental ailments, so we're already getting 50 here, and we're getting 50 from our boots, so we basically become elemental ailment immune, which is really nice. For Large Cluster Jewel, you want Blanketed Snow, Blast Freeze, and Doriani's Lesson. All 3 of these, and make sure it only adds 8 passive skills. This is a really important part of it. If it adds more passive skills, then you will have to travel a longer path to get to those nodes, and you really don't want that. For medium clusters, you want one with Powerful Assault and Vast Power, and another one with magnifier and pressure points. Medium clusters can have up to 5 passive skills, so they can have either 4 or 5 passive skills. Both are fine, doesn't matter that much. For extra explicits on cluster jewels, you want to have either Chaos Res or plus to strength, or you want to have plus to all attributes, or maybe even plus to dexterity, but plus to dexterity usually is not really necessary. You're really going to be struggling more with chaos resistance or strength. Last but not least, you want the normal jewels. So on normal jewels, you want increased maximum life for sure. You also want at least 1 damage mod, such as critical strike multi with cold skills, critical strike multi with spell damage, increased cold damage, increased area damage, increased damage. Whatever mod you can get, and make sure to check it in POB and see if it actually adds to your DPS. That's a very easy way to check if the jewel actually works, and sometimes you get a mod that doesn't really do anything for your build, so be careful there. You can also get extra stats on it, like plus strength and dex, plus resistances, anything else that you need capped. And also, if you have the currency, you can get corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you on one of the jewels. That's very nice. You can get less stats on the jewel because of that mod. However, it provides a nice quality of life, and you don't have to use your flask if you get corrupted blood, so that's pretty good. For Life Flask, you want Divine Life Flask that has 50% of recovery applied instantly and ideally grants immunity to bleeding, and if you don't have the jewel with implicit, also is useful for when you get corrupted blood, so you can use the flask. You also want to get a Dying Sun because it adds extra projectiles and area of effect to Winter Orb. And then you want to get Silver Flask, Jade Flask, and Quicksilver Flask. And it doesn't matter which suffix is on which flask, but what you want to get is you want increased cast speed during effect, you want increased evasion rating during effect, and you want increased movement speed during effect. So for example, Silver Flask can have movement speed, Jade Flask can have cast speed, doesn't matter. Check whatever's cheaper and buy that one. And for prefix, I normally use chance to gain a flask charge when you deal a critical strike. It's pretty decent and it procs because you crit all the time, so you gain charges pretty fast that way. Make sure to craft all your flasks, except the life flask, with used when charges reach full. This is really important quality of life, and this way you don't have to actually activate your flasks and they will be automatically activated while you're mapping, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's it for the gear, and as you can see, there's nothing crazy about it. It's really basic and straightforward gear. That's why I'm saying like this build is not super high tier or expensive, because honestly the gear is pretty basic. If you actually ignore spell suppression, then it gets really cheap. However, in this game and in the state of the game, this is not a good idea, and I feel like you do need spell suppression. You either need spell suppression or you need max block. In this case, it's spell suppression, so definitely do not ignore spell suppression on your gear. I wanted to mention the budget for the build. So I paid around 50 divines overall. Most of it was because of the unique jewels and Dying Sun, surprisingly, even though a couple leagues ago Dying Sun was super cheap, but somehow it's really expensive this league. Honestly, if the Dying Sun was not that expensive, the budget would probably be around 40 or so, and if you play later in the league, the budget can go down even further. So it's not a very expensive build, but it's not a super cheap one either. I don't really have a leveling section for this build, even though I did level with it in the campaign, and actually it went pretty smooth, despite naysayers saying that you cannot level with Winter Orb. In fact, you can, and I did. And one thing I would recommend is get a Profane Bloom early, because it really helps for clear, especially in the later acts. I can show you guys the gear that I was using. So I used Tabula Rasa, Gold Rim, Lectonial Caress, 2 Life Sprigs, Doedra's Damning, and then later I swapped them with Rigwald's Crest and the Hupe of All. I used String of Servitude, Astramentis, and last but not least, Wanderlust. I will put a link in the description that shows a little bit of my leveling in the campaign from my past stream. It's not the all leveling, so I did level off stream a little bit, but you can see the earlier acts. One thing I do want to mention is that I don't have a Leaguestarter version. So I was leveling with uniques, and if you want to League start with this build, you probably can. You will have to go down in damage significantly. Perhaps instead of 3 million DPS, you can have 1 million DPS, and that should probably be enough for early mapping. But I cannot say for sure, and you have to see it for yourself and test it maybe in standard and see how it goes. So what is this build good for? Well, it's good for any mechanics that you run in the maps. Blights, Delirium, Expedition, Breaches, Harvest, anything else that you can think of that you do in the maps. This build is perfect for it. It was made for it. It's gonna shine at it and you're gonna be happy. But when it comes to bossing, I can't really vouch for it because I've never done bossing on this build. My guess is that if you want to do bossing on this build, you will have to invest a little bit more money into it. Maybe swap the belt with mage blood, maybe swap the gloves with the temple gloves that give you increased damage with hits against chilled enemies, things like that. Maybe upgrade your rings and get some crit multi on it, increased cold damage, things like that, get better jewels with more mods. So if you do decide to run the bosses, please let me know in the comments. I'll be very interested to see how it goes. Last but not least, I wanted to show you guys how this build looks in maps, and I have two setups, one with normal gear and one with Headhunter, and the Headhunter version simply has different rings because I needed to cap my resistances, and when I put the Headhunter on, my resistances were like 60 instead of 75, so I had to get different rings for that. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the showcase, and don't forget to check out my stream. I stream regularly on twitch.tv/coffeecranked. Hope you guys come by and say hi.
We found the Let's have a look at the layout. It's time. Good job, Exile. Ah, there you are. Time to go. you are. It's time. Good job. Ah, there you are. Ready? It's time. Good job.
When I'm ready, knock.